enjoy the video. Hello and welcome back to the Fit Minds podcast with Coach Mariah and the Mariah Jean Fit Fam, or the YouTube vlog if you are watching the video. So today we are going to discuss yet again why carbohydrates are not the enemy. I think I've said this in a roundabout way in a few other podcasts, but this one's going to really hone in on why carbs specifically, any type of carbohydrate, is not the devil when it comes to things like fat loss, muscle gain, the list goes on. I am deeply studying carbohydrates as we speak. I have done so for years prior, but even now I'm studying deep, complex biochemistry. When we look at carbohydrates as a bigger picture and the way they've been treated in the industry, it's almost like an abusive relationship where the industry, the fitness industry and nutrition industry, seems to demonize carbohydrates as a food group. Specifically, if you're looking at fad diets, if you're looking at, jumping on the bandwagon with things like the keto diet, the paleo diet was an example of one years ago that, isn't it interesting how you don't hear a lot about it now? The Atkins diet, it's all a focus on lower carbohydrate intake. Now, don't get me wrong, there is a way to overconsume carbohydrates from a calorie perspective, and that's a whole bigger picture, where you're probably not worried about the overconsumption of carbs themselves, but probably more so the overconsumption of your total intake daily. And that's where we have the problem. So as it stands, I'll start off with why we have such an issue with body fat gain and not being able to drop the body fat for majority of the population now. We have an obesity epidemic. This is serious shit, right? This is what's causing most of our health issues in the health industry. Even with COVID, a lot of our COVID deaths had, there were some comorbidities such as diabetes and, people being overweight as well and having heart conditions that were pre-existing, which were in relation to the overconsumption of calories. It's how they got there, okay? Most of these instances of these chronic conditions and chronic diseases are being caused by the overconsumption of food, just in general of food. So there is a huge difference between the need to reduce total calorie intake, okay, total calories that you're eating for the purpose of body fat maintenance and reducing body fat stores maybe on your internal organs, which is the highest concern, and actually sanctioning an entire food group, which is incredibly essential for things like our digestion, our energy levels, and our brain function, not to mention our performance in the gym. The very activities we are trying to engage in to help ourselves lose body fat can actually assist us more so with this process with the presence of carbohydrates. So, in some instances, we see that people on a daily basis, general population, husband and wife, the standard, a generic family. I mean, it could look like anything. It could, whatever structure that looks like. It could be a single dad. But we're looking at, from a generic family perspective, most of us aren't looking at being, athletically leveled trained. We're not trying to, run marathons. We're not trying to perform crazy feats every day. Not every one of us is a bodybuilder. Not every one of us wants to go and compete. There's a very small percentage of the population who are going to engage in elite level training. So when you hone that right down and you're looking at general population for everyday people who literally, the 9-to-5ers or even the shift workers, the nurses, the teachers, you name it, I probably have named one of your professions. There are people who work in retail, people who work in human services of other kinds, and the list goes on. Even the corporate world, right? One of our biggest concerns currently for body fat gain, and it's the elephant in the room, is how much we're doing this and how much we're doing this. Now, for those who listen to the podcast, I've just sat down and I've pretend shoveled food into my face. The problem is there's a huge disconnection though with food consumption. There's a huge disconnection with the knowledge base that people have of calorie intake and food types. They kind of have this weird, they either have to, this is good and this is bad, or that's it. That's the only way they can really understand it, because most people can't be fucked with maths. That's why. They can't be fucked, They don't want to know how many calories they need to consume from a numerical perspective, because that would require some deeper thinking, slightly deeper thinking. And we want to, most people are looking at their nutrition, right? I want this to be as convenient as possible. If you're listening to this podcast, you're like, tell me why carbs aren't the devil. Tell me I can eat chocolate and bread. Yes, you can. Tell me I can do that, but tell me why. And I'm telling you that you can. But you've got to understand that if you don't know what energy measure you are eating on a daily basis, let's say you don't even have an estimate of that, you have no idea what your requirements are either. You literally are not even matching them up. Now, there was a time where we were not consuming as many calories, or perhaps maybe we were more active. But even in those instances, none of those occasions included that carbohydrates were the problem. And I'll tell you why. Cereal has existed ever since cereal's existed, right? It's been decades where we've had cereal exist, but we've had the increase of an overconsumption of all of the food groups. And we're talking about overconsumption of proteins, fats, and carbs. The statistics are actually showing in most Western countries, we're not just overconsuming carbohydrates, we're overconsuming all of the food groups. We're overconsuming, and these are the macros. Proteins, so your meats, your egg whites, your eggs, not that anyone's really eating egg whites. We're overconsuming, a lot of those protein sources. Now, we don't see people running around going, protein's the devil, it's awful, don't eat it. Okay, if anything, most people are probably not consuming enough protein and maybe over-consuming carbs and fats. That's probably the most common problem that we see. But in the Western world, for those who are struggling with obesity, they're just over-consuming all of the food groups. They're literally having steak portions that are far too big than what they actually require. They're having fatty meats, which have lots of fats in them. Okay, so we're talking about protein, fats, carbs. They're eating foods that are quite condensed with deep fried, and the like of oils, lots of oils, cooked in oil. Imagine how many times you've had hot chips this week, or how many times you've had a sausage roll this week. Oil makes things taste good. I've said this in a previous podcast. It does. Things taste delicious when they're covered in oil. Now, oil isn't awful for us, not all types of oil, but there are certain types of oils that you'll see more in the fast food and takeaway industry because they're easier to store, they're really cheap, and they're easy to make, okay? But they're not necessarily amazing for our bodies. The most concerning macronutrient group for your heart health in overconsumption, and specifically this type of the macro, is a saturated fat or a trans fat. Now, this is where we're seeing these deep fried foods. This is where we're seeing a lot of the chips that are cooked in oils, the crisps, etc. The sad thing is that our beloved carbs, they come covered in them, okay? So our poor carbohydrates didn't get much of a choice. It's kind of like carbs are just sitting there in the corner and they're going, leave me alone, please stop dipping me in oil. And things like potatoes, a perfectly good fucking potato, and we're turning it into this deep fried, dried, crispy, salty and delicious. But it's the amount of fats that are in these foods that we can actually overconsume a lot of without even realizing. And I'll tell you why. Protein, okay, when we talk about protein, if you were to say a lump of meat, for example, you've got some chicken breast here. Protein has 4 grams, so for every 4 grams, for every gram there's 4 calories, 4 calories per gram of protein. Now that doesn't mean literally the gram of chicken breast I've got in my hand, per gram there's 4 calories of chicken breast. That's not how it works. Chicken breast contains quite a few things. It contains protein and it contains water and some other fun stuff. A little bit of fats, not a lot, really. It's quite minimal, okay? So when you look at the makeup of chicken breast, and we have this protein, and we've got water, and there's lots of different types of protein in there as well. There's whole essential aminos and non-essential amino acids in there. So there's these profiles of proteins that we're working with. That's what chicken breast is made of, plus water. This is nice and simple, right? And so we've got 4 calories per gram of protein that's contained in this chicken breast. So this chicken breast has, I'm going to say, I'm just as a metaphorical chicken breast, 25, 30 grams, or 40 grams, whatever it is. It could be a really small bit of chicken breast. Okay, so we know that this is how much protein is measurable because they've done studies and tests per, 50 grams of raw chicken breast. They've found this many amino acids and protein in it. That's how we found that out, okay? It's crazy. People have studied this stuff. So we know that protein has 1 gram, 4 calories for each gram of protein contained in something. So if it has 30 grams of protein in something, well, then we're looking at the calorie intake is 3 times 4, so it's 120 calories for that serving of chicken breast, okay? And you can do the maths in reverse as well. You don't need to do this maths. This is just interesting to know. And so the density of this chicken breast is 120 calories, and it takes up quite a lot of room. That's the interesting thing, is it takes up a lot of room and it's quite slow to digest, so it fills us up. It's a highly satiating food group. It's the most satiating food group. So protein, if anything, one of the incentives to consume enough of this stuff, lean protein, is that it's going to fill you up for longer. Now, you find people who start diets and they start getting into a calorie deficit and I'm going to lose body fat. They start consuming enough protein. Sure, I'm going to have nice lean sources of protein and salads. And then they just forget about carbs. I'm just going to cut all of my carbohydrates out. And so they throw their carbs out the window, expecting to see these really drastic results, forgetting that there's another macronutrient group that we can pay attention to, and that's fats. So if we look at portion control of protein, making sure we're eating enough and not too much, and then we look at carbohydrates, right? So carbohydrates, I'm going to talk about half a cup of cooked rice. I don't actually know off the top of my head how many grams of carbs are in that. If you do, good on you. We've got this half a cup of cooked rice over here. Now we know that contains, let's say 20, 30 grams of carbohydrates, right? I might not be too far off. Now, obviously it's not 20 or 30 grams. The half a cup of rice weighs physically more, but it's got water, okay, there's fiber, there's a starch. There's stuff in there that has to make up what rice is, but it's mostly carbs. Okay, so we're talking about a pure carbohydrate source. So let's say 20, 30 grams of carbohydrates. So then let's work with a 30. Now we know that carbohydrates has the energy equivalent, so same thing, per gram of carbohydrates contained in something is, again, 4 calories. The equation is 1 gram of carbs, 4 calories, right? Equivalent to. So we know that, okay, 3 times 4, 120, half a cup of rice, 120 calories. And you know what? I'm probably not too far off. I'm pretty sure it's about 110 calories off from memory, depending on the rice type. Let's not get into that argument. Okay, so we have chicken, we have rice. I have very simple ingredients right now. And then the third macronutrient is fats. Now, the reason why I've left this till last is because fats are a very dense, calorie-dense macronutrient. Quite filling, second most filling macronutrient, which is why a lot of people seem to get by on a high fat, high protein diet because it fills them up. But it leaves them with no energy, and also you run the risk of over consuming the fats and blowing out your calories anyway. And the reason why is because let's talk about a tablespoon of peanut butter, and I'm going to hold this up in front of you. It's like if you've just literally visualized chicken breast in your palm, half a cup of cooked rice in your palm, and then we've got a tablespoon of peanut butter in the middle here. Now, we all know that a tablespoon of peanut butter, relative to these other 2 macronutrient groups and food sources, doesn't take up very much room, does it? It's this tiny little tablespoon, and yet it has 110 to 120 calories in it. Why? Why is it so calorie dense for such a small amount of these fats? So would you not think then, if something is deep fried in something, how easy it is to coat something in calories? It's literally like lacing something with poison and going, eat it, you won't be able to see it, but it's there, yeah? So this is the analogy I'm going to use. Fats are secretively very high in calories, and we can put them in anything without people really noticing. It can preserve the life of a food, and it can also help out with the taste of the food and the like, and the consistency and texture. Interestingly enough, it improves consistency and texture. So fats, this little tablespoon of peanut butter, 120 calories, equivalent of these 2 other food sources in calories. How? It takes up such a small amount of room. Wow, why is it so calorie dense? That's how much energy that thing contains, right? And so we've got this peanut butter, and the reason why is because fats, per gram of fats contained in something, and funnily enough, peanut butter also contains a little bit of carbs, a little bit of protein as well, but we'll talk about that later. But fats are very dense, and per gram of fats contained in a food item, so let's say peanut butter contains, for that 20-gram serving, it contains, I think it's maybe 11 or 12 grams of fats off the top of my head. I might be wrong, could be 13, could be higher. Right, it contains that. And so if we look at how many calories per gram that fats has, it's actually 9 whole calories per gram. That's more than double what carbohydrates and protein are per gram. So that's why fats are so condensed. That's why it's so easy to overconsume fats. That's why it's so easy to overconsume calories by overconsuming fats. And interestingly enough, a lot of this comes down to portion sizes and understanding what is in things you're eating. You must be aware, okay? Stop blindly buying things based on the way they're advertised to you. Turn the packet around, look at the kilojoules, look at the calories, understand the conversion. If that looks really high in calories per serving, or even so, if you're not adhering and looking at the serving sizes, it's a very easy way to overconsume just food, calories in general. So now we know that the problem with society and our issue with body fat gain is not to do with just the excess consumption of one macronutrient group, and it never has been. It's the overconsumption of all 3, or 2 of them, or 1 of them. It doesn't really matter, but it's the overconsumption of all calories in general. So how do we start to change this without cutting all of the carbs out altogether? How do we keep the carbs in, but just maybe not eat as much of them? Now, this is not as obvious as you would think. I've seen this happen as well, where people have gone, okay, well, I'm just going to reduce my carbs, and by doing that, I'm going to have 1 slice of bread instead of 2, and I'm going to have maybe a tablespoon of rice instead of half a cup, and I'm going to have, I'm not going to have, I don't know, what's another obvious carbohydrate? Potato. I'm not going to have potato, I'm going to have pumpkin for dinner. And this is where I see people really go south with it when it comes to carbohydrate consumption and this idea that they have to reduce it drastically. Because they're going from one extreme to another. They're going from eating takeaway chips on the weekends and burgers with their mates, where they're over-consuming tons of calories in one sitting and a soft drink and maybe a milkshake on the side. And they're not actually paying attention to how they're over-consuming the calories and how they can actually reduce them without having to cut entire food groups out. There's a couple of ways you can do this, and I'm going to tell you how to do this so that you understand carbs are not the devil. Carbs are not the devil, okay? So, and then I'm going to dive into what uses carbohydrates actually have for us in a positive sense. So, ways you can reduce your total caloric intake, and I'm not talking about 1,200 calories, okay? I'm not talking about following Karen's calorie intake because you DM'd her and asked her what she was eating. I'm not talking about following some generic meal plan on the internet that you don't understand why you're not eating carbs, but you just aren't and you hate your life, okay? I'm talking about how to make sustainable choices every day, which will actually bring you to being able to reduce your calorie intake and carbohydrate excess or fat excess quite easily. Number 1, reduce your takeaway intake. I know it's a pain in the ass for me to tell you this. There are some options out there that are going to be slightly lower in calories or macros, but if they don't provide the kilojoules on the menu, if you can't see them in front of you, guess what? You got no fucking idea what you're eating. You have no idea. You could be literally consuming thousands of calories in one sitting. My advice is if you do want to eat takeaway, if you're going to have takeaway once a week, you're going to save money if you stop doing this too. If you want convenient and you want to have takeaway once a week, go somewhere where you know what the caloric intake is going to be or the value is going to be of that food. A great option is going to be grilled, Subway. There are quite a few of them out there, even overseas in different countries if you're listening. You know there's going to be things on the menu that are going to contain the caloric value. Also, understand what is in those foods, right? So it's all good and well to eat takeaway out once a week, but if you're doing this quite frequently, let's say, okay, you know the calories, you're doing it every day. If you don't understand what ingredients are in there If there's saturated fats, for example, in high amounts and you're still staying within your calorie range, you could be putting yourself at risk for heart disease. So just keeping in mind, it's nice and it's fun to have takeaway food and fried chips and all of the above, but it could be one of the things that's actually harming you considerably and where you don't actually need to make such drastic decisions and changes in your everyday life. And that means making food at home. Where the hell did we lose this skill to make food at home? And I'll tell you where. When takeaway became a massive thing, like think about the launch of McDonald's and the drive-through industry. We're talking about the 50s, I'm pretty sure it was the 50s and 60s, if you've all watched the documentary, when it became a thing to eat takeaway more often. So it's not a coincidence that obesity has become more worse, like honestly, look, do you think it's more worse? Love that. It's become worse and worse as the years have gone by. You look at Uber Eats, you look at the things like all the food apps that we have, all the food delivery. You don't even have to walk to the place where you're getting it anymore. You can't even burn the calories when you walk in there because you're going to sit on your dot and someone's going to deliver it to you. Now, this isn't to say you shouldn't have Uber Eats or you shouldn't try and, treat yourself every now and then. Sure, I'm not the fun police. Be mindful of it because we don't know what's in these foods most of the time. I'm talking 95% of the time. You got no idea what the calories are in these foods. And this could be what could be tipping over your entire week. If you're doing this a couple of times on the weekend and you're getting takeaway numerous times on the weekend, guess what that does? It throws your entire week out. So you see these weekday dieters who are like, Monday to Friday, I'm going to be really good and I'm going to diet really hard. I'm not going to eat carbs. I'm not going to eat any takeaway. And then bam, they just hit this massive wall on the weekend and it's like saturated fats heaven. And we see this as practitioners all the time. We see this all the time, this blatant abuse and avoidance of the elephant in the room. And they would rather just cut out food groups entirely during the week, feel like absolute trash, and then eat an entire, family-sized McDonald's meal in one sitting. There's a reason why you're doing this. You're hungry, okay? You actually need carbs. Your body is screaming for carbohydrates. So, carbohydrates get a really shitty rap, right? So the changes you can make, the small changes you can make in your day. Fizzy soft drinks, full sugar soft drinks are the number one cause for the overconsumption of carbohydrates as a macronutrient group in the US. Fizzy soft drinks, I know, crazy, right? I think there's a couple others there, baked things and biscuits and sugars that are fructose and things they've added to food items. Be careful of that too. Honestly, there's the weirdest shit has sugar added to it. Sugar isn't the devil either, right? That's another thing I want to go into. But just understanding that a lot of packeted foods that you are eating contain these little sneaky doses of fats, carbs, that are so concentrated because they're literally in liquid form that you won't even know they've been added. You can't taste them. How many times have you eaten a biscuit and gone, I can taste that cane sugar. Yes, nice hint of cane sugar in there. No, you can't taste it. You can't taste it because it's liquid. Ben & Jerry's, the first ingredient of Ben & Jerry's is liquid sugar. Liquid sugar. Now, don't get me wrong, love ice cream. You can include Ben & Jerry's in your diet. Just understand that you can probably only really fit in a lesser amount of ice cream because Ben & Jerry's is very concentrated in calories. Why? First ingredient's liquid sugar. It's not actually ice cream, it's sugar with ice cream. That's the way I refer to chocolate sometimes as well. If you look at Cadbury chocolate, first ingredient, sugar. There's always the first ingredient on a packet is going to be what it's made up most of. So I don't even call Cadbury chocolate chocolate, I call it sugar with chocolate added. Now, we can't demonize chocolate. I actually really like chocolate. I eat Cadbury chocolate daily. I love Cadbury chocolate. I just eat a smaller amount of it. I don't eat as much of it because I know that that's a sometimes food and it's the calories in that that's important to pay attention to. The total sugar intake is probably more important for everyday people than it is for athlete level training, people who train 4 to 5 times a week, okay, because they actually use the sugars to train. Now, if you are engaging in training 4 to 5 times a week, then yes, you might be able to get away with a little bit extra sugar. The reason why we started to come up with these sugar recommendations and limitations is because people were going fucking crazy. They were like, drinking liters of soft drink and going bananas with lollies and chocolate and binging on them to the point where they had to do it legally. They had to say, right, you gotta get control of yourself, mate. You can't eat a whole block in one sitting. And if you do, don't feel bad, just move on. But breaking that pattern relies on realizing that it's not black and white or black or white thinking. It's not good and bad. It's not carbs are the devil or carbs are, this thing I binge on. It's that in small amounts and moderation, you're going to be okay. You're going to be okay. And if you want to make these adjustments daily, it comes down to making those small choices. So fizzy soft drinks, fruit juices, you don't need them. You do not need fruit juices. They are not good for you. They contain, yes, some fruit aspects, but some of them aren't even fruit. They're just made up of there's 6 ingredients in it, and fruit juice is one of the last. This is very well marketed to you. People are trying to make money off you. And I say this in every single podcast. When I give you this free information, I'm not making any money off you. I'm not even trying to sell you an idea. I'm not even trying to sell you a culture or a brand. I could start to say, try if it fits your macros and go down that path. I'm not going to say that. I'm just going to talk straight facts. And if you don't like it, then you are part of the problem, okay? You're part of the problem accepting this narrative that you have to not enjoy life, not have bread, not enjoy the things that you love eating them. You love eating them. You do. It gives you energy. So the other small changes you can make is have a look at the packeted items that you're eating at the moment. Okay, you're currently eating some packeted items daily. Most people are. Comes from a packet, some things. Have a look at the calorie intake, the calorie value of those particular packeted items. You'd be surprised how many things are marketed to you as healthy, or it could be anything, low carb, you name it. And you look on the back and you're like, oh, that's a lot of calories. Now, what's a lot of calories? It's hard to say unless you're following a calorie intake at the moment, and you have to go down that path if you're wanting to actually properly make sure you're in a calorie deficit and you're not trying to starve or, go crazy with cutting out food groups. But just be aware. Look on the back of a packet, do some comparisons. Oh, wow, this is 2 slices for half as many calories and it looks just as good. Might give that one a go. You will become more savvy in brands that are probably trying to just sell to you, and probably a little bit better with buying brands that are going to have a slightly lower calorie intake, and they're not going to have plastered across the front, unless they do try to market lower calorie, but they're not going to have branded across the front healthier for you. It's just less calories, right? So it's just a numbers game. So I'll use a great example. One of my favorite examples is bread, loaves of bread. Comparing different brands, there is literally a brand of bread called Country Split, which I've been eating for the last 10 years, on and off, depending on how many calories I'm eating a day and what my goals are. But Country Split is 110 calories for 2 slices of a wholemeal bread. Great thing about that is you're getting a wholemeal bread, so you're getting a little bit of those mixtures of different grains and the wholemeal type of bread, as opposed to just a white bread. So it's a little bit better for your gut. Especially if you find that you respond yucky to white bread. Some people are different. It doesn't really matter. It's just there's wholemeal, there's white. 110 calories for 2 slices. Now, if you do the comparison to, let's say, I love Bergen bread. It's great because it's quite high in protein. And if I'm trying to get extra carbs and extra protein in, I actually eat the Bergen bread. So if we do the comparison though, you're looking at over 200 calories for the Bergen bread, and then you've got the Country Split bread, 2 slices for 110. So it's actually half the amount of calories. Small little swaps like that can actually help you move forward with your calorie deficit and just making changes. If you know currently you're eating too many calories, the takeaway is the first one, the liquid calories is the next one, and then the third one is small swaps. Just swaps. You don't have to not have it, just swap it. Don't cover your potato in oil. You're adding calories to your calories. And if you want to, go easy on the rest of the fats for the day. Be mindful of that everything contains an energy value, not just carbs are shit and I want to have low carb as possible because that's it. We do see success for general populations, everyday people, most people who are going to be listening to this podcast, where we reduce the carbohydrate intake, yes, from where they are. But that's because they don't even know how many carbs they're currently eating. But it's not, because I need to go into a calorie deficit, I'm just going to chop them out completely. That is literally like saying, I'm going to go for a run that's 20 Ks and I'm going to sprint the entire way. No, you're not. That is ridiculous. It's not sustainable. It's not going to work, and you don't need to do that. To do the 20 Ks, you just need to do a moderate pace, right? Okay? It's the opposite of sitting on your bum is moving, but you don't have to go to the extreme. And even so, even if you think, oh, I can do it, I can cut out carbs, good luck. Because if you try and sustain that for the rest of your life, you're miserable, all right? I can eat bread daily, you can eat bread daily unless you're gluten intolerant, you're celiac. I'm so sorry if I'm rubbing that in your face. Everyone can eat a little bit of chocolate daily, unless you have some intolerances, unless you have some serious issues and you've been properly tested for this and you've gone through the rigorous testing criteria to know that maybe you have a sugar allergy. It's quite rare, but all of the above, you can enjoy small amounts of the things that you really like, or swap them, or just literally pay attention to the amount of calories that you might be consuming. Sauces are a massive one. Holy shit. You know that the Benedict sauce that's on your eggs on your smashed avo on the weekend can have more calories in it than the toast and the eggs. It's bananas. It's actually crazy how many calories sauces have in them. And it's interesting, Western worlds, we're fascinated with adding sauce to everything and adding sugar to the sauce and adding fats to the sauce to make it taste delicious. There are lots of different versions of sauces that can literally be double, triple, quadruple the amount of calories that maybe we might have a lower fat version or maybe a lower sugar version of that particular type of sauce. So if you like your sauce, actually pay attention to how many calories are in your sauces and you'll start to be more aware. Even things like your meat intake. You can start to reduce the really fatty meat intake that you're having at the moment if you're eating the gristle, okay? If you're getting cuts of meat that are literally covered in fat, or you're getting sausages and there's tons of saturated fat in sausages, unless you're getting a leaner version of them. Pay attention. Open your eyes. It's not from one extreme to the other. All right, so now we've established that carbs aren't the devil, and hold on, Mariah might have something, she's got some weight behind what she's trying to explain here, that it's not carbs that are the enemy, it's the amount of total calories, it's the particular types of, branded food items we're eating that might have some concealed calories, hidden in there to make it taste a little bit better, or to act, honestly, sometimes it's to act as a filler. Do you know how many times brands will literally stuff other ingredients into something just because it's cheap to put it in there? Madness, right? So the last point that I will touch on about carbohydrates, and it probably needs a lot more time than I'm going to give it, but I don't want to rattle on too much because my podcast can be quite long, is that carbohydrates serve an amazing purpose. And I'll say plant-based carbohydrates, I'll start with those. Plant-based carbohydrates, if you want to start cutting carbs, that means that you would literally have to cut things like your broccoli, your spinach, your cucumber, your zucchini, plant-based carbs, all of your veggies, gone out the window, because they're carbs. They are carbs. They might not be as high in carbohydrates, but they're technically classified as carbohydrates. Now, the plant-based fibers contained in them actually assist with your damn digestion. So you see these people going on all these all-meat diets? I've seen, oh my God, it's disgusting. All-meat diets. And I'm like, do they poop? How do they poop? Where? How are you pooping? Poop is a great topic, and if you don't like this topic, then please dip out of the podcast. But fiber assists with our digestion, and the amazing thing that I've learned recently is it actually helps decrease the risk of cancer, heart disease, diabetes, you name it. It's crazy what fiber does for the human system. We're meant to eat plants, we're meant to eat veggies, right? And if you're currently avoiding eating vegetables, men, if you want to live longer, because I see men avoid vegetables more than women do, funnily enough. If you want to live longer, one of the best things you can do is increase your vegetable intake from where it is currently. Literally, in America, less than 10% of people in America, 10% of people in America are eating less than 1 serving of vegetable a day. That's 10% of the entire population who are literally not even meeting 1 serving of vegetable a day, okay? And we're complaining about feeling like shit. We're complaining about being depressed. We're complaining about, the list goes on of, I can't poop, or I'm having digestion issues, or whatever. And they're not even consuming the very items that, number one, aid with your digestion. Number two, prevent chronic disease and illness. It's not some sort of magical, it's not some sort of magical, yes, people do get sick by chance, absolutely. But there are ways to prevent this. If you've been eating like an asshole for 20 to 30 years, you're going to want to bet you're going to get sick eventually, somehow. It's going to get you. It's going to catch up to you. shit, but right now it might not matter, but in 20, 30 years time, it'll matter for your kids. Okay, it'll matter for you. Your life does matter. So I get very passionate about this. Fiber also aids with digestion, aids with chronic disease management, but then we look at these vegetables. Why are vegetables so important? What the fuck's in these things? Amazingly, they're a carbohydrate that actually contain essential micronutrients, and it wasn't just when you were a kid, your parents going, eat your veggies it's because it makes you feel better, you perform better, you think better, and also you don't get sick as much. Interestingly enough, these amazing vegetables contain literally combined, honestly, in a whole diet, you've got over 40 different essential nutrients that you need to survive and prevent disease. That's what you need, okay? It's actually been proven you need it because there are people who've gone without it. They did studies, in the past with people who were malnourished, and they found that they were more likely to develop these issues, respiratory issues. They were more likely to develop all sorts of sicknesses because they weren't eating enough vegetables. So, and specifically, maybe they weren't meeting their other nutrition requirements as well, like their protein, like their essential aminos, like their healthy fats, like their omega-3s, like their healthy cholesterol as well. So, going back to what I was talking about with carbohydrates and fiber and plants is that plants are fucking awesome. We know that. They're made of carbs. Okay. The next thing is that bread and these carbohydrates that we keep demonizing are literally just made of grains, another plant-based source of carbohydrates. Much higher in energy value, sure, than a plant is. But there's for a very good reason. We need things like niacin and riboflavin, and there are so many things that are contained in grains we shouldn't be avoiding, okay? Essential nutrients contained in things that we probably need to be eating, okay? So this is why things like whole grain cereals exist. It's why they exist, why oats exist. It's why rice exists. It's why, bread exists. Bread, obviously, it's the baked version of wheat plus a few other things. And if you've got gluten intolerance, if you actually have gluten intolerances, you're actually celiac, there are plenty of alternatives that you can have, or just don't have bread if you don't want to. You can literally look at, there's actually ways to make bread from sweet potato of all things. So we keep demonizing potato and sweet potato and rice and bread because they have more calories in them, sure, than what plant-based carbohydrates do. And they're slightly different in what they contain, but they actually make up a large chunk of what we require. We actually require this to reach essential nutrients that we need for our survival. So if that's not an indicator of why you shouldn't cut carbs out completely, I don't know what is. Now, the other reason why you need carbohydrates is energy provision and brain function. Obviously, we know that. Have you ever get those afternoon fuzzies? You might have had a salad for lunch and then at 3 or 4 o'clock, you're like, oh, what's going on? Your glucose has dropped. Your blood glucose levels have dropped. And we talk a lot about in the fitness industry about insulin resistance and all that type of jazz. Sure, again, if you're eating like an asshole and you're over-consuming calories, if you're over-consuming, carbohydrates, etc., we can have an influence on insulin levels where we do start to see the early onset of diabetes, etc. But it's in conjunction with over-consuming your calories. There's no sort of coincidence there that this is the big elephant in the room is the amount that we're eating in calories of the total intake. So I won't go into depth about insulin. I don't have time to do that today, and I certainly don't want to bore you with it because this is the never-ending debate about insulin. But we do know that we want you to be more active because being more active, getting exercise, is a part of releasing endorphins, happy hormones, helping battle things like depression and anxiety. There are so many things that happen when we exercise that are fantastic for our body. Probably not a cure-all, we know that. We know it's not going to fix everything. We know that you can't out-train a bad diet. We know that you can't out-train an overconsumption of calories because training is very relative. It's, as I said in a previous podcast, you can train for half an hour and burn 150, 200, 300 calories, and you can eat 300 calories in 10 seconds. It's relative. It's very relative. It takes a couple of minutes to fuel up a car, and it takes a week, maybe a couple of days to burn through a tank, depending on how much you're driving, how much you're using it. That's exactly how calories and energy output work. So energy input, calories, and energy output works is literally like a fuel tank, okay? The process. Now you understand that analogy. So, carbohydrates for performance. Now, if we were talking elite athlete level training, marathon runner, sprinter, they're going to need really high carb diets. And it's because there's a process that requires, from an anaerobic and aerobic perspective, which pretty much means weights training, and we're talking moderate to intensive, or even sometimes light to moderate, and even things like moderate to intensive, things like sprinting, even long distance running, you name it, they all kind of have this commonality that they do require carbohydrates at some stage for the fueling process to occur adequately and at its best. There will be stages where your body will only rely on fats, but at the best, if we're looking at high intensity training, if you're doing HIIT sessions, if you're going to the gym and your heart rate's going bananas, it's a really smart idea to actually consume carbohydrates that day, or obviously timing it nice and close to your workout if you're in a calorie deficit. And the reason why is because our body works better with carbs. It just does. You end up being able to burn more energy because you've got that available there to use, and your body goes, yes please, love it, quickly available energy, I'll take that. Fats, not so much. They're not as easily accessible, okay? So if you're thinking about having a keto diet, or this diet where it's just meat, and even protein, for example, as well, the body is less likely to access these particular macronutrient groups in moderate to higher heart rate training zones. And if you're anything like me, it's not hard to get up to moderate or high heart rate training zones, okay? But if you're just going for walks, if it's just walking, sure, your body can access just body fat stores, really low level intensity exercise. Yes, yoga, even I think might be lumped into that depending on how intense it is. Sure, your body can just access body fat stores and you might not need as many carbohydrates, or you might not need to time your carbs right before your training, okay? But honestly, if you were to just do walking as a means of exercise, you're going to have to do a lot of walking, okay? Because it's very relative also. So it takes quite a long time to burn enough calories from walking. So I like to use this protocol for general population, resistance training with added walks on top of that, and obviously my comp prep as well for physique style. If you want to become a marathon runner, if you want to get into the police force, if you want to become this elite athlete, high performance, you name it, you've got testing criteria, you might want to be a power lifter. Slightly different story of what training protocol and what exercise protocol and what activity protocol we're going to try and use. But for general population, it's actually, interestingly enough, very similar, the type of method that's required to achieve what you want. And it doesn't always apply to this idea that, for example, high HIIT training and as little carbs as possible, they don't go hand in hand. Your body will not function best with all of that intense, short burst, high rate work without some carbohydrates there to use. If you're in a calorie deficit, you will find that it's finding the balance that's the most important thing about this process. Not demonizing carbs, not eating a shit ton of carbs to the point where you think that you're about to explode, and basically getting somewhere in the middle. And all of that boils down to this. You need professional help. You need to learn. You need to actually be willing to learn. You need to break out of the shitty cycle you've been in for years where you've been looking for quick fixes so that you can just do something simple. Because the problem with the simple option and the simplest of options is that it doesn't work, not long term. There will be sustainable solutions like the ones I mentioned to you, reducing the takeaway, reducing the liquid calories, and making some smart swaps with your calorie intake. And also, the final point is alcohol. It's a completely different macronutrient group. So it's more dense in calories just literally for that alcohol shot. Not even the mixes that you're including in there, which will be quite calorie dense as well. It's more dense in calories than protein and than carbohydrates are. And also it's going to be almost on par with fats in the way that it's dense in calories. Nobody wants to hear that alcohol is super high in calories, and nobody wants to hear that alcohol consumption can be a major contributor to your overconsumption of calories and also your health issues. So this is the final point that I'll touch on, is that one of the things you can probably improve is reducing your alcohol intake, and you'll be able to fit more carbohydrates in, and you'll also improve your health in the long run. So That's it from me for today's podcast and vlog. I really hope you enjoyed it. Make sure you like and subscribe and rate our podcast because it helps out with our exposure, and share. Share this vlog or podcast with your friends and family to make a difference in their lives. Thanks a lot. Talk to you soon. Bye.